The story of the Obamas is the story of the American dream.
The guy's got no money, he's got no organization, and nobody can pronounce his name.
A story of dedication, perseverance, and patriotism.
Lead by example with hope, never fear.
Together, they faced the impossible and conquered it each and every time.
Because helping people is what great nations and great people do.
Follow the incredible journey of a little-known senator from Illinois and his humble family as they built a political powerhouse of outward-looking optimism that would capture hearts and inspire millions of people across the United States and beyond. The family of hope, and yes, we can, that placed their bet on America and won. This is the story of the Obamas. Believe.
They called me all sorts of things. They called me Alabama. They called me Yo Mama. I had to explain, no, it's Obama. And then I had to explain that my father was from Kenya, where I got my name from. My mother was from Kansas, which is where I got my accent from. Well, we got some Kansas folks here. All right.
Barack Obama didn't get into Columbia University right away. He actually started off and went to Occidental College in California. And then he transferred into Columbia University, an Ivy League school. But from there on, his career really soared. He would eventually get a law degree from Harvard Law, and he would be the first African-American editor of the Harvard Law Review. Then he continued to engage in community activity in Chicago. From there on, he became an Illinois state senator for 8 years. And he gained some experience in the Illinois State Senate, and then this propelled him to the national stage when he would become a U.S. Senator in 2004.
But you know, I would sometimes get another question that people would ask me, not just about my name. They would ask me, you seem like a nice young man, family man, you got a fancy law degree, you teach at a fine law school. You could be doing so many things. Why would you want to go into politics? Why would you want to go into politics? And the question's understandable because we feel cynical about politics sometimes. Even those of us who are active sometimes feel that our leadership is long on rhetoric but short on substance. They sometimes feel that politics is a business and not a mission, and that power is trumping principle, and so we get discouraged sometimes. And it's tough because we see those in power think that their primary job is to protect the powerful from the powerless. And so maybe every 2 years or 4 years, we go out and we vote against somebody instead of for something. And we don't truly believe that, in fact, government can be a cause for good in our lives, but instead we just hope it does us no harm. But what I told people the first time that I ran for the state senate, and what I told people when I started running for the United States Senate, and what I say to you here today, is that there is another tradition to politics. The idea is that we are all connected as a people, that all of us share something, that these children right here lined up waiting for the red hot chili peppers, that I've got an investment in them even though they're not my children. Just like you have an investment in the children in the south side of Chicago who are trying to figure out whether they've got a decent education. And it's that idea that we are all connected, that I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, that we have a set of mutual obligations towards each other that express themselves not only in our families, not only in our communities, not only in our places of worship, but also in our government.
Family has always been central to Barack Obama's life. You could see that he didn't uproot his whole family to Washington, D.C. because they were based in Chicago, and he would regularly commute back and forth to ensure that he was with his family in Chicago as much as possible.
Michelle LaVaughn Robinson grew up in the south side of Chicago. It was primarily a white area when she moved in, and then it became a mostly African-American area by the time she left. She grew up with a very working class family. Her dad was a shift worker. He put on his uniform every day. Her mother went back to work in order to support the family, help raise the kids. She grew up with her brother Craig. They lived in a very small apartment above a home that her aunt owned. And basically the living room was cut up into like 3 living spaces. And she had a very small single bedroom with just a partition between her and her brother. In fact, it didn't actually go to the ceiling. So she and her brother Craig would like throw a sock over back and forth at night. And they'd be like, "You up, Craig?" "Yeah, I'm awake." It was a very simple, humble beginning. But Michelle says that it was fundamental to her growth and development. Her parents gave her the foundation and the determination to succeed. Michelle says that her mom always said she was a little extra. She remembers vividly, even now, I think she was in kindergarten and she got the answer wrong on a colors test. And it bothered her so much that she went back to the teacher the next day and asked for a do-over, which she got, and she aced it. From the very beginning, Michelle Obama wanted to achieve. She wanted to get 100%. She wanted to be the best. And growing up in the south side of Chicago, she was not going to let her color, her socioeconomic position, anything hinder her from getting to the top. Michelle relates a very poignant story in the book about how when she was applying for colleges and wanted to go to Princeton, one of the guidance counselors at the school, even though Michelle had, top of her class, great grades, she'd been active in extracurricular things, she said to her, "I don't think you're Princeton material." And, Michelle, what she did was she ignored it. She went to the assistant principal and got a recommendation from them instead. Michelle says, "I wasn't going to let one person's opinion of me dislodge everything about me that I knew was true." This is, to me, one of the most inspiring things about the entire book, Becoming, in that from the very beginning, Michelle has been telling other women not to let someone's opinion of you determine who you are, not just women, but everyone. And the fact is, Michelle herself faced people doubting her from such a young age, even in high school, but she didn't let it stop her from achieving her dreams.
And I wasn't even sure my family could afford the tuition. I didn't have anyone to help me study for entrance exams. And the fact that I was a girl and that I was Black, well, that certainly didn't help things either.
Michelle went on to Princeton, and everyone knows, of course, after that, she went to Harvard Law School, and she rose to the absolute top of her field. One of the other things that comes out in the book that's very compelling is that she hated being a lawyer. She'd gone to Harvard Law. She was at the top of her game. She was at a law firm, very prestigious, and she was doing all these court documents day in, day out. And she said to her mom, "I hate it. I hate being a lawyer." And her mom actually tried to talk her into staying as a lawyer because of how much money she was making. It was an incredible amount of money. And she said, "Okay, make your money and then later do something you love." Because what an amazing opportunity. But for Michelle, she realized that she had to follow her passion, which was helping people. It wasn't producing court documents. And of course, we all know what happened.
In August 1989, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson was working as an associate in the Chicago law firm Sidley Austin when she was assigned to mentor a summer intern. That summer intern was Barack Hussein Obama.
While Michelle was at Sidley Austin, in comes a summer intern, Barack Obama. Barack was basically her mentee. I mean, she was his mentor. So he had come in new to the firm. She was already experienced, and she was kind of his babysitter in a way, showing him around, introducing him to people. She says now that she thought he was like handsome and bright and lovely, but she never thought about dating him. It wasn't that kind of connection. In fact, she even talks about thinking to set him up with one of her friends, and then he wore some kind of weird outfit that looked like he was out of Miami Vice with a white linen jacket, and that just went down the drain. So she's very candid in her book about the fact that it wasn't love at first sight, that he had this distinct whiff of geekiness about him, and she saw him as being amazing and great, but not dating marriage material. I think he kind of grew on her, but rather quickly, because once they actually did have their first date, Michelle says it was almost immediate that she knew that this was going to be something pretty incredible.
He was definitely pursuing her, and she had her reservations, and eventually he won her over.
One of the things that really unites Michelle and Barack is they have a rather disruptive sense of humor. They sort of are not mainstream. They have their own kind of sardonic, cynical views on things, and they love to give each other a hard time. But they were early on in their courting stage, and they went to see Les Mis, the musical, together. And, you know, everyone loves Les Mis, the soaring music and the wonderful themes. And she says it just felt like grunts and chains to her. She hated it, which is not normal, but she hated it. And anyway, during the intermission, she turns to look at Barack, and he just looks at her, kind of looks up at one eye, goes, horrible, right? And it's just, he knew that's what she was thinking, and she knew that's what he was thinking, and they really share that. They have their own shared sense of humor. They have their own shared jokes. They give each other a hard time. They push each other to do better. And I think that's one of the reasons they're still together, and it's magic.
If I had worried about who liked me and who thought I was cute when I was your age, I wouldn't be married to the President of the United States.
Well, actually, even now, there's very famously a plaque outside the Baskin-Robbins in Chicago where Barack and Michelle had their first kiss. Barack wrote in his memoirs that, "I kissed her and it tasted like chocolate." One of the biggest revelations in Michelle's book, Becoming, is her own painful struggle to have children. We find out that Michelle had a very painful miscarriage prior to having her daughters, and then was forced to rely on IVF for the successful conception of her two girls, Malia and Sasha. This was something she writes about in really breathtaking detail. She talks about the loneliness of, you know, injecting herself at 9 o'clock at night somewhere with the hormone she needed, how the fact that Barack was often gone or traveling was difficult as she was contemplating the IVF and doing the IVF. She's very honest about it and very candid about her own struggles to have her girls. And this is something we never knew before. Michelle is very honest in her book, Becoming, about her and Barack's marital difficulties. She doesn't paint a perfect picture of their marriage. In fact, she actually said in an interview with Oprah Winfrey for Harper's Bazaar that, yes, I know people see us as #relationship goals, but it's not as picture perfect as it may seem. I think for Michelle, it was important to paint a more accurate, realistic picture of the fact that you have two very intelligent, very driven, very ambitious people who are trying to find a way to have a successful partnership and marriage. One of the things Michelle talks about is how her way of loving and her feeling of security was different than Barack's. You know, Barack didn't grow up near his mother. He was raised by his grandparents, and yet he knew his mother loved him very much. For Michelle, she wanted him present. She wanted her husband around her. That's how she felt loved and secure. But for Barack, it didn't need to be that way. So I think Michelle's very honest and open about the fact that she and Barack had to find a way to love each other and also be true to themselves.
I think many people thought that Barack Obama came out of nowhere because he didn't really have a long legislative career. He wasn't someone who had been slogging away in the Senate for years or had any experience as a governor. He didn't have a ton of political experience, and he definitely didn't have a ton of foreign policy experience. And so for that reason, many thought, you know, this is someone that's just coming on the scene, a fresh newcomer that no one really knew that much about. But in truth, he really had a lot of fame on a national level, and not just a national level, but an international level. Even before he became president, he was able to make a trip to the Middle East, meet then leader Nouri al-Maliki of Iraq. He also took a trip to Germany, did this important speech in Berlin that was sort of echoing JFK's speech in Berlin in the 1960s. And so he had more than just local attention. He had national levels of attention. He had international fame. He was being asked to be interviewed by all kinds of media outlets. He's being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. And there was a constant clamoring for him to do an interview because there was a huge thirst for what he had to say.
Tonight is a particular honor for me because, let's face it, my presence on this stage is pretty unlikely. My father was a foreign student, born and raised in a small village in Kenya. He grew up herding goats, went to school in a tin roof shack. His father, my grandfather, was a cook, a domestic servant to the British. But my grandfather had larger dreams for his son. Through hard work and perseverance, my father got a scholarship to study in a magical place, America, that shone as a beacon of freedom and opportunity to so many who had come before.
That keynote speech really put Barack Obama on the map. It was considered a manifesto of hope and unity. He was incredibly charismatic and viewed to be a once-in-a-lifetime type of political star.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America.
And that's why John Kerry had selected him to speak. They knew that he was going to basically bring the house down. The speech was 17 minutes long. He was interrupted 33 times with just rapturous applause. And the speech sort of built with more and more momentum. And he really honed in on things that America really needed at the time, you know, the themes of hope, optimism, and what the potential was for what the U.S. could do. And after that speech, everybody knew his name, and they knew he was really going to be a huge star.
The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states. Red states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats. But I've got news for them, too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around in our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states, and yes, we've got some gay friends in the red states. There are patriots who opposed the war in Iraq, and there are patriots who supported the war in Iraq. We are one people. All of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes. All of us defending the United States of America.
Right, well, I think Barack Obama has been known for his eloquence, his ability to captivate an audience, how articulate he is. He has excellent timing in his speeches. I think this was also known when he would deliver speeches that required some comedy. That he was great at telling jokes and would really make an audience laugh at the key points when was needed. That he's not just a stiff politician, but was someone people could really relate to and was really inspiring. In the lead up to the election campaign in 2008, it was just tremendous turmoil, discontent, because the economy had been doing so badly. There was one point in 2008 that 170,000 jobs were being lost in a month. Unemployment was almost at 8%, and there was real pessimism and concern about the U.S.'s future. I mean, there was a general consensus that the invasion of Iraq had not been going well, that the U.S. had overstretched itself, and there was real questions about U.S. leadership just in the world and whether or not it was capable of getting itself out of this terrible recession that was hitting.
Barack Obama's political career was soaring. His decision to run for the 2008 presidential election was, in his own words, a family decision, and one Michelle met with a great deal of hesitation.
I think it was difficult for Michelle to come to terms with the fact that Barack wanted a political career. She's very civic-minded, but she hates politics. And so she really didn't want to get into any kind of career where there would be mudslinging and all the different things that come with it. But as always, she wanted to support Barack in whatever aspirations that he had. I think she understood that he had aspirations for greatness and was capable of achieving these types of things. And that he's sort of a once-in-a-lifetime type of person that a type of candidate that the world had never really seen before, definitely the US had never seen before, and that she was going to need to support him. And that didn't necessarily mean that she had to let go of her own ambitions. It just meant, that she needed to be side by side with him and supporting him all along the way. I'm sure she was one of his biggest fans, but also one of the people that he trusted the most in terms of offering him advice.
As Barack Obama's fight for the 2008 presidential election began, the eyes of the American public turned toward their prospective First Lady.
When she was originally campaigning with Barack in 2008, what's impossible to think of now is that she was thought of as a liability because of several things that she had said. She was being interviewed by reporters in early 2008, and she had mentioned, "This is the first time in my adult life that I am proud to be an American." And this really didn't play well. People didn't like the fact that she was emphasizing race too much. Then her dissertation was published when she was a student, which emphasized how difficult it would be to be an African American in a white university. That also didn't play over very well. And there were caricatures of her as this angry Black woman who was militant and was overly focusing on race. And they decided that they were going to basically give her a complete makeover, a complete image makeover, because they felt that she was coming across as too forceful. And so they gave her this big image makeover, which they unveiled at the Democratic Convention in August of 2008. And it was really successful.
As I tucked that little girl in and her little sister into bed at night, you see, I think about how one day they'll have families of their own, and how one day they and your sons and daughters will tell their own children about what we did together in this election. They'll tell them how this time we listened to our hopes instead of our fears.
In her speech, and she was a great speaker, just as Barack is, she mentioned family quite a bit. She really emphasized her maternal role, and she exuded a lot of warmth. And it was really natural, this warmth.
How this time in this great country, where a girl from the south side of Chicago can go to college and law school, and the son of a single mother from Hawaii can go all the way to the White House, that we committed ourselves.
And one of the things that people say when they think about Michelle Obama is her authenticity and how honest she is, how frank she is. And this came across really effectively in this particular speech, but also in other campaign speeches that she has done subsequently.
So tonight, in honor of my father's memory and my daughter's future, out of the gratitude for those whose triumphs we mark this week, and those whose everyday sacrifices have brought us to this moment, let us devote ourselves to finishing their work. Let us work together to fulfill their hopes, and let's stand together to elect Barack Obama, President of the United States of America. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Now you know why I asked her out so many times, even though she said no. You want a persistent president.
Michelle, Malia, and Sasha traveled the length of the country during what was a grueling campaign schedule. Delivering speeches, hosting fundraisers, Michelle did her part to support Barack, but it wasn't without its challenges.
The campaign experience was draining for all of Barack Obama's family. They were constantly on the road and having to deal with, raising kids on the road. Michelle Obama was having to give a lot of speeches. And this kind of carried on into the 8 years that she was in office. I mean, she was exhausted, and she talked about how she was looking forward to being able to do so many things that she couldn't do before. I mean, it was something that, she really gave up a lot in order to support him and for this goal of achieving something for the greater good. I mean, I think she really felt that this was something that she needed to chip in on and be supportive of. Not because she really wanted to do it, that this would have been her first choice, but she just felt it was the right thing to do. I think she knew that everything starting from the campaign to the way she adjusted her image for the campaign, to the way she kind of adjusted her image to be this new type of first lady, all of this stuff was a huge sacrifice to her. This wouldn't have been her choice. This wouldn't have been what she wanted to do. She didn't have these types of political aspirations, but I think she saw this as all part of something that needed to be achieved. Just the country at this time needed optimism and needed these types of policies. The actual night itself, there was quite a bit of optimism because Obama was going into the night with a lead in the polls by 5 to 10%. And there was a feeling that his campaign had been very dynamic and that he was likely to flip some states. So in the end, you had him winning 338 electoral votes, winning 52% of the vote, and he flipped 7 states that had been previously in the hands of Republicans. And that was significant. I think some of the most significant wins were in the Rust Belt, namely Ohio, but also Virginia, of course, North Carolina, and Florida. And these wins came out earlier in the night, and it became clear he was going to be the winner. But at election night, the electoral victory was, for many people, one of the greatest moments for them. And they probably agreed with what Michelle Obama had said earlier that year, that it was a moment where Americans felt proud. It was definitely a moment for minorities, the African American community, even the Hispanic community, that they felt that they had achieved something. It was just one of the most impressive things that the U.S. had accomplished.
On a cold January morning in 2009, Barack Obama was inaugurated as the 44th President of the United States. Standing close by his side, holding the Bible he swore his oath upon, was America's new First Lady.
Most First Ladies are expected to be supportive, to stay out of politics, to stay out of controversies, to choose to get behind policies that are non-controversial. And they weren't expected necessarily to have a career other than being a supportive political wife. And that really was the mold. Hillary Clinton broke the mold before Michelle Obama in some ways because she herself was such an ambitious person. But the key difference here is Hillary Clinton always had political aspirations. And this would dog her time period while she was Bill Clinton's wife. Because of all the different scandals going on, there were questions as to why they were even together. And many were very cynical about the fact that, well, this is because she one day wants to be, a politician, a senator, the president, and so forth. Michelle Obama was able to balance the ambition of Hillary Clinton with some of the warmth and caringness that previous First Ladies were able to exude in ways that really hadn't been seen before.
Your actions really do make a difference.
When he first took over this first 100 days, his approval rating was pretty solid. It was 56%. He had achieved a really important piece of legislation, and that was an American Economy Recovery Act. So this bill was over $800 billion, and it was a bill signed that was hoping to improve infrastructure, Medicare, healthcare, unemployment benefits. And by both conservatives and liberals alike, this bill was considered to be a success, and was considered to be critical to lifting the U.S. out of the recession that it was facing. But after this first 100 days and the honeymoon period sort of wore off, there were criticisms coming from both sides about him not accomplishing enough on the progressive side and him, using executive orders too frequently on the Republican side. And so he really couldn't win. And then once he was dealing with a Republican-held Congress, it became really difficult. It was really contentious. And there was a lot of battling a lot of these issues out, and a lot of the times he didn't win.
it was clear to the world each and every day that the Obama administration held office, that the Obamas, as the first family, shared an unparalleled love and closeness. Michelle Obama's mother, Marion Shields Robinson, lived in the White House to maintain those strong family bonds.
Michelle Obama is incredibly close to her mother. And she always admired her mother. Her mother was always there for her, at home cooking every meal. And she had a really, really idyllic upbringing. And this close-knit family, in some ways, it was something that Barack Obama lacked because his parents had split up and he moved around quite a bit. But I think that the decision for Michelle's mom to move into the White House with them illustrates how close they really are, how much Michelle relies on her mom to support her and to just be there for their daughters and to provide the family a foundation and some normalcy. The media even nicknamed her the first grandmother. So I think some families, having your mother-in-law live with you wouldn't be ideal, but that, you really don't understand how close this family is and how supportive, she is to their daughters, but also to Barack and Michelle.
And I've seen it again and again and again, that what our parents told us really is true. That if we get our education, we can do anything, and we can truly be builders of a new day.
One of the things Michelle did, which was unusual, was that shortly after she moved into the White House with her girls, she moved her mother in. Marianne Shields Robinson became the first grandmother of the White House. For Michelle, she knew she was going to be unavailable to her girls sometimes, whether she was accompanying Barack on a trip overseas or she had meetings. And she wanted someone she knew and trusted to help her raise her daughters. As busy as she got, she never took her eye off the ball when it came to raising Malia and Sasha. And I think moving her mother in was something that families do, but it's not typically something that first families do.
Our glorious diversity, our diversities of faiths and colors and creeds, that is not a threat to who we are. It makes us who we are.
Now, Michelle Obama's 5'11". She's extremely tall, and she wore heels all the time. She was someone who is proud of her stature and in no way a shrinking violet by any circumstance. People who have met her have said that she's incredibly impressive for her strength and her height and her persona and her presence. But she also liked to sneak out of the White House, and she would do it frequently in disguise. Despite her height and her elegance in stature, she was very often able, in fact, to do just that. There's a wonderful story in Michelle's book about how she and her daughters wanted to celebrate the moment that same-sex marriage was legalized in the US. It was an historic moment for gay rights. And this was a subject and a topic that Michelle had been really passionate about from the beginning. She said, we teach our children about equality and fairness, and she wanted so much for the US to acknowledge that gays and lesbians have the right to get married. She compared it to the civil rights movement and how this was a human fundamental right that they deserved. And she was so excited when it was finally made legal. The White House was actually dressed in all the lights, the colors of the rainbow flag. And she said to her girls, come on, let's go see it. She wanted to be a part of that historic moment. So they actually snuck out of the White House and stood in front of it so that they could see the White House bathed in the colors of the rainbow flag. It was a great moment, and it was a very fun part of the story of the book.
If you look at her career as a first lady, she chose issues that were really apolitical. She wanted to improve the livelihoods of veterans and their families. She worked to improve nutrition for children and to improve their mobility and physical fitness. And she really cared, about families, and that's what she emphasized in the end. Something that really wasn't going to be controversial in any way, shouldn't have been controversial. At times it was controversial just because the first family was on the receiving end of criticism from time to time. But in the end, she had very high popularity ratings. higher than Barack Obama's popularity ratings. And now, as people are looking back on her career as a first lady, she's one of the most well-loved first ladies in history, and one of the most admired people in the US just recently.
This country should be doing everything in our power to give more kids the chance to go to schools just like this one. We should be doing everything we can to put college within the reach of more young people. We should be doing everything we can to keep your streets safe and protect you from gun violence. We should be doing everything we can to keep families from falling into poverty and build more ladders of opportunity to help people who are willing to work hard climb out of poverty.
Well, the fight to get the Affordable Care Act was this huge, huge battle, and Republicans were incensed about it because they were worried that it was going to put too many restrictions on people for their choice. They were worried that it was more of a mandate that forced people to get insured that didn't want to get insured, and it forced them to take on a plan that was going to require them to pay higher premiums than they might want. The Republicans fought tooth and nail to prevent this from getting passed. But in the end, the Obama administration really pushed through this legislation as quickly as they could. Republicans were incredibly critical of this, but they knew the significance of this. They knew that this was really important. They knew that there were 22 million Americans that were uninsured. They knew that the current game was set up that insurers were going to always reject Americans that were sick, because the way it worked was if you had a pre-existing condition, you could be denied health insurance. The Obama administration knew that they needed to change this, that this was going to be the signature piece of legislation, was that they needed to get more and more people insured. They needed to prevent health insurance from being something that was unattainable, and they needed to make sure that healthcare wasn't something that pushed you into bankruptcy.
Every sitting president finds that their time at the helm will come to be defined by key historical events, whether by their own volition or not. For President Bush, it was the contained trauma in a kindergarten classroom when he learned that America was under attack on the darkest day in U.S. history. For President Obama, no one will ever forget the power of his announcement that the heinous ringleader of the 9/11 attacks had at last been brought to the ultimate justice in a top-secret military operation that he had ordered.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
Barack Obama's handling of the decision to kill Osama bin Laden was one of the major events of his leadership. He had always been accused of not having a lot of foreign policy experience, that he was naive and maybe not considered tough on foreign policy as some of Republican predecessors had been. And it was a huge gamble on a number of fronts, because if it didn't work, if it was botched, and if Navy SEALs or U.S. servicemen died in the process, it wouldn't go over well at all. It would be terrible, similar to when Bill Clinton went into Somalia and there were soldiers being dragged through the streets. So there was this real potential for it to be a disaster. The other caution was that it was the U.S. working unilaterally on Pakistan soil. And Pakistan is supposed to be a U.S. ally, though this alliance is checkered with all kinds of issues. This was a U.S. ally that they were not really informing what they were up to. The other issue was how it would be perceived in the world if they were successful. Would it be legal even? And that led to a whole series of legal checks by the Obama administration, conferring with legal experts in the CIA, in the National Security Council, in the Pentagon, about the legality of this maneuver. But in the end, they felt there was enough certainty that they had to take this risk and execute this plan. I'm sure there was quite a bit of anxiety about it, but it was considered successful. And it probably was one of the key issues that helped him win re-election.
Unfortunately, the Obama years were marred by a continuing rise in gun violence. On December 14, 2012, a senseless mass shooting took place in Newton, Connecticut, at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. Both Barack and Michelle described this as the darkest day of their time in the White House.
The majority of those who died today were children. Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old. They had their entire lives ahead of them. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, kids of their own.
Probably the most frustrating issue for his career was that he couldn't do more in terms of gun control legislation. He had a Republican-held Congress that was pretty adamant that, there was really nothing to be done about reforming gun laws, that it's not guns that kill people, but people who kill people. The NRA has always been a huge lobby, incredibly strong, really hamstringing congressmen, both Democrats and Republicans, in terms of what they're able to do or willing to do. And he wasn't really able to get anything passed. I mean, there were some key pieces of legislation that really should have been passed in terms of banning assault weapons, creating longer background checks. But in the end, really nothing got done. The victims of the Sandy Hook massacre commented how frustrated they were with the Congress at the time. But there's another criticism of him coming from the NRA, actually, almost on the flip side, that they felt that his efforts to attack guns and go after the gun industry were really more symbolic than really having much teeth to them. That there probably could have been more he could have done, but didn't do. But these are sort of one of the questions that I think progressives and conservatives will always have about this, because it was this stain on his presidency, something he felt he didn't do enough on. And the questions are, was it really all Congress that blocked this, or was there more that he possibly could have done?
Even as leader of the free world, President Obama still understood the vital importance of a simple act of humanity. His honesty, warmth, and humility earned him the nickname Comforter-in-Chief, one he would demonstrate most clearly during a speech at the church funeral in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015 to honor the victims of a racially driven mass shooting.
Amazing grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
I think what a lot of people who know Michelle Obama say about her is she's hilarious. She has a great sense of humor, and she's really funny. One of the great dynamics between Michelle and her husband is there's a friendly competitiveness. They are famously competitive with each other. A friend of mine who was actually at the 2004 convention when Barack's keynote speech thrust him into the national spotlight. Just before he went on stage, Michelle gave him a big hug and said, "Don't screw it up, buddy." So Michelle has a very famously competitive, very kind of funny, competitive relationship with her husband. And in her book, Becoming, it's really remarkable how much shade she throws at her husband, where she talks about his whiff of geekiness on their date and other things that make him seem very human.
I think for Barack and Michelle's children, Sasha and Malia, growing up in the White House probably wasn't easy. They had some advice from the previous first children, the Bush twins, Jenna and Barbara Bush. They actually took them under their wing and gave them a lot of helpful advice. But one of the things that made it easier for them was that they had such a strong family. They had their grandmother living with them. They had their mother ensuring that, they're able to live as normally as possible. And something that is notable about those 8 years for them was that there was never anything negatively reported on them, ever. And it could be, the media was, exercising some caution there. But even since they have now, become younger adults and are no longer living in the White House, they have earned a reputation for just being really solid, well-behaved girls that have been really raised well. And a lot of this has been attributed to the work that Michelle had done in the White House, but also Michelle and Barack as a family, just ensuring that they had some level of stability and normalcy, in spite of the fact that they were living in very abnormal conditions.
Earlier today, as you heard, Malia and Sasha and I visited the Long Room at Trinity College. As you know, I don't know if many of you have been there, it's like Hogwarts. As Sasha pointed out, it's a huge room with shelf after shelf full of books. A beautiful place, and I hope that all of you aspire to go there, if not study there, but just to go and experience what it's like to be surrounded by so much history and so much power. And the girls had the chance to explore those shelves and trace their iris and lineage, which was a very powerful thing to find out that these girls that were born on the south side of Chicago can trace their roots back here to Ireland, way back to the 1600s. That was very powerful for me as their mother, and hopefully it will be something that they cherish for the rest of their lives.
One of the things Michelle is best known for is the fact that she's an incredible public speaker. And some say that she's even better, or let's say as good as her very famous husband. Michelle and Barack were actually quite competitive about their speeches. When Michelle was prepping to give her 2016 Democratic Convention speech, which is the very famous one where she says, "When they go low, we go high," Barack heard her in one of the rehearsals and ended up going back to his notes to work a bit harder to make sure he was as good or better than his wife. Michelle is a famously good public speaker. She has great presence, she has great authority, and at the same time, she manages to be interesting and relatable. It's one of her best skills.
It's hard to believe that it has been 8 years since I first came to this convention to talk with you about why I thought my husband should be president. Remember how I told you about his character and conviction, his decency and his grace, the traits that we've seen every day that he served our country in the White House. I also told you about our daughters, how they are the heart of our hearts, the center of our world. And during our time in the White House, we've had the joy of watching them grow from bubbly little girls into poised young women. A journey that started soon after we arrived in Washington, when they set off for their first day at their new school. I will never forget that winter morning as I watched our girls, just 7 and 10 years old, pile into those black SUVs with all those big men with guns. And I saw their little faces pressed up against the window, and the only thing I could think was, what have we done? See, because at that moment, I realized that our time in the White House would form the foundation for who they would become, and how well we managed this experience could truly make or break them. That is what Barack and I think about every day as we try to guide and protect our girls through the challenges of this unusual life in the spotlight.
Barack and Michelle Obama had an excellent relationship throughout the presidency. I mean, any relationship is going to be tested when you're dealing with high levels of stress. And so it's not to say that their relationship didn't experience some bumps and some tense discussions along the way, and they've admitted that. But they see themselves as a team. They see themselves as much stronger together than apart, and they really respect each other. They see each other as equals. And I think during the entire presidency, they were able to weather a lot of storms, difficult storms that he faced, just being president, all the attacks he faced. They were able to weather this together, and their relationship is probably stronger as a result. But it's really one of the few political marriages that was just completely scandal-free. That was really about a deep love that they shared for one another. That wasn't really about a marriage of political convenience. And, you know, both Republicans and Democrats alike would have to acknowledge that this was a very solid relationship. It was a model relationship, and one that a lot of other people could learn from.
This is progress, and it proves that the work that we're doing as a global community is paying off.
Some of Barack Obama's greatest strengths while he was president, that he was very calm, very measured, very pragmatic, tried to remain above the fray as much as possible, and really just tried to unite people. I mean, I think that was the initial years in office, was focused on how do I unite the public.
We cannot eliminate evil from every heart or hatred from every mind, but what we can do and what we must do is make sure our children and their children learn their history so that they might not repeat it.
He brought with him a fresh face, tremendous hope and optimism that the U.S. hadn't really seen in a long time. And he brought with him tremendous moral character. He was someone who was considered a great family man, and that the morals that he learned from his upbringing, but also from just his life with Michelle and his two daughters, was something that transcended onto the way he did politics. That, you know, he cared for people, that he cared for what was right, that he cared for ethics, that, you know, he was one of the candidates that accepted the least amount from big lobbies, you know, like tobacco, big corporations, the NRA, and so forth. You know, most of his donations were coming from individual donors. And a lot of this was because, you know, he resonated with individual donors, with individual people, that he was honest, real, someone who didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth, had sort of rose to greatness through hard work and effort, and was really committed to improving the U.S. Some of his greatest weaknesses as president, from the progressive side, was that he was trying too hard to win everybody over. And in trying to win everybody over, he ended up winning no one over. You know, his approval ratings weren't great after the 100-day honeymoon period had ended. You know, there was some real concern that he wasn't really doing anything, that it was all about messages of hope, campaigning on optimism, but in the end wasn't delivering what he had promised. Of course, in hindsight, we see it takes years for these policies to have effect. And he was able to bring the U.S. out of the recession with some of these recovery acts and other pieces of legislation. But at the time, there was a sense that he wasn't fighting enough, that he was someone who folded at times when things got tough. Now, these are the harsh criticisms of him, because of course there are others that say that he was really fighting for things and pursuing executive orders, really trying to move quickly and circumvent some of the legislative process to the best of his ability. But I think early days, you see these criticisms of, was he doing enough? Was he trying to be too nice? Was he trying to placate everybody? And not realizing that these people were never going to be placated.
Since the White House, life has slowed down for the couple, but not too much. First was the massive international success of Michelle's memoirs, Becoming. And then came a huge deal with streaming service Netflix for the world-renowned couple who will be putting their skills to the test by producing 7 documentary films.
There's tremendous nostalgia for the Obamas. I mean, look what the US is dealing with at the moment. It's just complete government disarray, investigations, disunity, polarization. It's very stressful for most Americans today in dealing with the current administration. And this is even though the US economy is actually doing fairly well. As a result, a lot of Americans are really nostalgic about the Obamas. Those that were probably a little bit too critical of the Obamas, either on the left or on the right, at least recognize that it was a period of direction, of calm, prudency, where the US could say that they were a world leader, that they held some moral high ground. And I think as we move on into this new era, a period of politics that is more polarized than ever, you're seeing the need for a type of chief executive who can comfort people, who can unite people, who's articulate, who's educated, who knows how to say the right things in the right moments, and doesn't try to divide us.
The political landscape of the United States has shifted dramatically since the days of the Obama administration. But nonetheless, the impact of the work achieved remains fresh in the minds of millions as a guiding light of hope for what can truly be possible when a United States stands together, focused on the future, on hope and change, united.
So don't be afraid. You hear me? Young people, don't be afraid. Be focused. Be determined. Be hopeful. Be empowered. Empower yourselves with a good education. Then get out there and use that education to build a country worthy of your boundless promise. Lead by example with hope, never fear.
God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.